It was the sound that made the entire ballroom fall silent. A low, distant thrum, mechanical, rhythmic, growing louder with each second. I didn't even have to turn around. I already knew what it was. And I knew exactly what came next. "Sorry I'm late," a voice rang out from the main doors, smooth and self-assured. "Had to park the helicopter." I didn't look. Not yet. I let them look first, my mother, with her half-smirk frozen mid-laugh, my aunt, still holding a champagne flute halfway to her lips, my brother Robbie, slack-jawed in the corner like he'd just seen a ghost. I lifted the microphone closer, smiled slightly, and said, "Well, I guess that answers your question. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand that moment, you need to know what happened just 30 minutes earlier. The engagement party was being held at the Sugar Land Marriott, one of those massive venues with chandeliers too big to make sense and floors that echo no matter how many people walk across them. I walked in alone, draped in a deep wine-colored sari, hair up, gold jewelry minimal but deliberate. All eyes turned to me, not because I was stunning, but because I wasn't supposed to be alone. "Where's your fiancé, Lena?" "Still in, where was it, Doha." "Have you thought about freezing your eggs yet?" I smiled, nodded, dodged. My cousin Nisha was glowing in the center of the room, surrounded by layers of silk and admiration. She deserved her moment. I wasn't here to make waves. I was here to show up. But then I heard them. Near the cocktail bar, my mother Mina, my Aunt Tara, and two other women I didn't recognize, probably distant relatives with too many opinions. "I've stopped asking," my mother said, laughing. "She says he's in aviation." "What does that even mean? Is he a flight attendant?" "She never shows photos," Aunt Tara added. "Maybe he's imaginary." They burst out laughing. Not polite chuckles. Big, open mouth, can you believe this girl laughter. I stood frozen behind a flower arrangement, holding a glass of sparkling water, watching my hand tremble ever so slightly. I could have walked away. I should have. But I stayed, letting every word land like a slap. They'd always done this. Doubted me. Mocked my choices. I didn't go to med school. I didn't marry the first software engineer they threw at me. I moved to Berlin at 23. Then Dubai. Started a boutique branding firm. I built something, but it was never enough. Not for them. Especially not when I told them I was engaged, and said he couldn't meet them just yet. "He doesn't exist," they'd said. "No man would stay with a girl like you this long without meeting her parents." They didn't know about the nights Kian and I spent building our dreams over takeout and mood boards, the red-eye flights he took to surprise me between contracts in Zurich and Riyadh, the way he kissed my forehead whenever I felt like giving up. But they didn't want to know. They only wanted a version of me that fit their boxes. So I kept quiet until now. The MC had just called for toasts. People were murmuring. Champagne flutes were raised. My name was next on the list. I stepped forward, heels steady, voice calm. I didn't prepare anything. I didn't need to. "I'll keep it short," I said. "It's beautiful to witness two people who are supported, celebrated, and believed in. Not everyone gets that. If you do, hold on to it." There was polite applause. Nothing more. Then came the thrum, the hum of propellers, the rush of wind. Confusion swept through the room. Some guests turned toward the windows. The planner rushed to the door. And then he walked in. Kian. Slim-fit navy suit, no tie. Hair slightly windswept, as if he'd just stepped off a yacht commercial. Watch catching the chandelier light, just so. He walked straight to me, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "Did I miss your toast?" I exhaled. "No, you're right on time." People clapped, awkwardly. A few guests exchanged glances, unsure if this was planned or just surreal. My mother looked stunned, still holding her glass, but no longer remembering why. Her dupatta had slipped slightly off her shoulder. She didn't fix it. It was the first time I had ever seen her speechless. But to really understand why, you have to go back. Back to when everything between us started to unravel. I grew up in Sugarland, just outside Houston, in a tight-knit Indian American household where tradition wasn't just a suggestion, it was the law. My parents, Rajesh and Meena Patel, were the blueprint of expectation. My mother ran a strict household while managing my father's dental practice from behind the scenes. My father? Charismatic, respected, calculating. The kind of man who believed effort only mattered if it produced results that could be displayed in a glass cabinet. By 16, I already knew what they wanted from me. Stanford, med school, husband, 2 kids by 30. If I strayed from that path, there would be consequences, subtle ones, silent ones, but sharp as razors. And I tried. I really did. I enrolled in a pre-med track at Rice University, took on the MCAT prep classes, wore the smile they liked. But the further I went, the less I recognized myself. My sketchbooks stayed under my bed unopened. My hands itched for charcoal, but I kept holding a scalpel instead, until I didn't. I left medicine in my junior year, switched to design, told them over dinner. My father didn't speak for 10 whole minutes. My mother said, "So, fashion school," and laughed like I'd just told her I was joining the circus. The day I moved to Berlin for my first freelance contract, my mom refused to come to the airport. My dad handed me a check as a peace offering, then added, "Just remember, if it doesn't work out, we won't say we told you so." I didn't cash that check. For the next decade, I built something out of nothing. Started in brand consulting, slowly scaled into luxury market strategies, moved to Dubai. Clients came from Paris, Qatar, Tokyo. I signed NDAs with billion-dollar companies and hosted private roundtables at the Burj. But in every call home, I still felt like a dropout, a cautionary tale they whispered about to other parents at temple gatherings. They told everyone I was between jobs, that I was living abroad to find herself. When I met Kian, God, I was already so tired of hiding. We crossed paths in Copenhagen, of all places at a boutique aviation summit. He wasn't just handsome. He was quiet in the way only confident men are. We talked about culture, design, displacement. Then he told me he flew small aircraft across Europe and the Gulf as a consultant for private defense clients. It sounded absurd. And yet, I believed him completely. I didn't tell my parents about him until nearly a year in. Their reaction: "Why haven't we met him? Are you sure he's real? He's a pilot? Like for Delta?" They couldn't wrap their heads around someone who didn't have a LinkedIn title like managing director or surgeon. To them, aviation sounded like a hobby, not a career. I stopped trying to explain. So when Nish's engagement invitation came with my mother's handwritten note, "Hope your fiancé can make it this time," I knew exactly what tone that smiley face carried. Sarcasm, doubt, dismissal. It had been that way for years. Me on one side of a glass wall, screaming my truth, while they stared back, unimpressed and unlistening. But Kian didn't need them to believe. He only asked what time the event started. When I told him traffic in Houston would be a nightmare, he simply said, "Then we'll take the heli." I laughed at first, thought he was joking, but he wasn't. Kian wasn't the kind of man who needed to be loud to be seen. He let others underestimate him until they couldn't anymore. And tonight, just as I was about to be buried under their ridicule once again, he came crashing into the scene like a plot twist no one was ready for. Kian didn't come in with fanfare. He didn't need to. He stepped into that ballroom like it belonged to him, like the chandeliers had dimmed themselves in anticipation, like the marble floors had waited all evening just to echo his steps. And for a few seconds, no one knew how to react. My Aunt Tara blinked rapidly, her smile fading into a twitch. My cousin Nisha, bless her heart, looked confused, then curious. Ravi's eyes widened like he was seeing me for the first time. And my mother couldn't decide whether to fix her sorry or her expression. Kian walked straight to me, bypassing every cluster of murmuring guests. He didn't hesitate. He didn't perform. He simply looked at me like he always did, with warmth, steadiness, and the kind of quiet love that doesn't ask for approval. Then he kissed my forehead gently, like the rest of the room didn't exist. "Did I miss your toast?" he whispered. I shook my head slightly, voice steady. "No, you're right on time." And just like that, the temperature shifted. The judgment in the air dissipated. Skepticism began to melt, replaced by something else. Curiosity, calculation, maybe even regret. Guests who once averted their gaze when I entered now leaned in. Someone near the buffet whispered, "That's him," and another added, "I thought she was joking." He was no longer the myth they'd scoffed at. He was here, real, and devastatingly composed. Kian turned toward the crowd with the calm assurance of someone who'd attended enough black-tie galas to know that silence is more commanding than applause. He shook hands with whoever approached, always polite, always measured. He didn't flaunt his credentials, he didn't need to. My Aunt Tara extended her hand stiffly. Kian shook it with grace, then turned to my mother. "Mina, Auntie," he said warmly, "it's very nice to finally meet you." She hesitated, half a breath too long. Her fingers fidgeted at the edge of her dupatta. Then she took his hand with a rehearsed civility I'd seen her use on annoying neighbors or women with too much contouring. "Oh," she said, her voice light. "Yes, of course. Hello." It wasn't real warmth, but it wasn't a slap either. My father, Rajesh, was better at hiding his surprise. He stepped forward with a firm handshake and a half-smile that could have belonged to a conference room. But I saw the flicker, just a twitch, near his jawline. He was sizing Kian up the way he did with business partners who wore custom suits, but didn't mention which firm. "So, you work in aviation?" he asked, the question layered with doubt. Kian nodded. "Mostly consulting now. Defense logistics, flight strategy, projects across Europe and the Gulf. But I still fly occasionally, keeps me grounded." Ironically, a few nearby cousins chuckled, not because it was funny, but because the room was recalibrating. Everyone was, desperately, because I wasn't the lost daughter anymore, the eccentric cousin, the artistic disappointment. Now, I was the woman with the man in the helicopter. And more importantly, I was the woman who didn't need to prove herself anymore. For years, I had walked into rooms like this with my shoulders tucked in, my voice softened. I had tiptoed around their expectations, hoping for crumbs of approval. Tonight, I watched as the people who once scoffed at my absence now tripped over themselves to justify their own presence. Kian was being pulled into introductions by my second cousins and whiskey-sipping uncles who suddenly found aviation logistics fascinating. I stood back, just a little, taking it in. It was surreal, like watching a play where suddenly I wasn't the tragic side character anymore. I was the storm that rewrote the script. From the dessert table, Ravi approached with a slice of cake and the same smirk he wore when he stole my Halloween candy in 1998. "So," he said, jerking his chin toward Kian, "that's your guy." I didn't even look. "That's Kian." He let out a low whistle. Still didn't think he was real. Honestly. I sipped my water. A lot of people didn't. He paused, maybe to apologize, maybe to say something clever, but I didn't give him the chance. I turned and walked away toward Nisha, because I was done standing in place for people to catch up. Later that evening, just as the music shifted into something slower and softer, my mother found me standing alone near the staircase that led to the valet. The party behind us was still in full swing. The lights were warm. The air smelled of cardamom and hairspray, and yet something in her face had changed. She looked unsettled, not angry, not even embarrassed, just curious, like she didn't quite understand what had just happened. She hesitated, hands clutched in front of her, then said, "Why didn't you tell us he was coming?" I turned slightly, not enough to face her fully. Would it have changed anything? She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. I didn't realize." I raised an eyebrow. "Didn't realize what?" She looked down at her hands, fingers still playing with the edge of her bangles like they held answers. Then, with a quiet voice, she said, "I didn't realize he was this serious." And there it was, the weight behind every phone call where she questioned my judgment. Every family dinner where I was asked if I was still doing that creative thing. Every time I said I was happy, and she looked at me like I was pretending. Now she believed, only because he landed in a helicopter. I should have been angry, but I wasn't. I was tired. "I've been serious," I said, arms crossed, voice low. "You just didn't want to believe it unless it looked like something you could brag about." She flinched, not visibly, but I saw it. A tiny pause in her breath. "I'm glad you came," she said after a moment. I nodded. Me too. But not for them. For me. Because for the first time in years, I didn't walk into that room hoping to prove anything. I walked in knowing exactly who I was, and watching everyone else scramble to catch up felt liberating. A little while later, Kian found me again on the rooftop garden attached to the venue. It was quiet up there, away from the dance floor and the endless buffet lines. You could see the stars struggling behind the Houston haze. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, rested his chin on my shoulder. "How'd it go?" he asked softly. I didn't answer right away. I watched the tiny pinpricks of light across the sky, listened to the low thump of bass below us, the laughter and clinking glasses fading into background noise. "Better than I expected," I finally said. "Worse than it should have had to be." He didn't say anything, just pulled me closer. "They'll catch up," he murmured. "I'm not waiting," I said. "I know," he replied. And we stood there for a while longer, the city buzzing beneath us, the night thick with everything unsaid. I didn't know what would happen next, whether my family would try, whether tonight was a fluke or a turning point. But for once they saw me, and more importantly, I saw myself. When we finally made our way back down, most of the party had dissolved into that awkward stretch of time when aunties start packing leftover biryani into Tupperware and uncles linger with whiskey glasses, not ready to leave but not adding anything to the conversation either. We said goodbye to Nisha and Dev. They were glowing a little tipsy, perfectly content in their own version of tradition. I hugged her tight. "You did great," I whispered. She smiled. "So did you. You have no idea how satisfying that was for me." We both laughed, and in that moment I realized she hadn't needed me to explain or justify. She'd always known. As we headed toward the valet line, I could feel my parents' eyes on us from across the room. They didn't say much. My father gave Kian a polite nod. My mother offered a thin-lipped smile that almost passed for warmth. It was fine. I wasn't expecting transformation, but something had shifted, maybe not dramatically, not overnight, but tectonically. The next few days felt strange. Not cold, not distant, just suspended, like everything had paused mid-shift, waiting to see which way gravity would pull. There was no explosive fallout, no angry texts, no dramatic confrontation with my parents asking, "Why didn't you tell us?" Or, "Is this serious?" No sudden dinner invitations or tearful apologies either. But small things started happening. Quiet, almost imperceptible things. My father forwarded me an article from Forbes titled "How Boutique Branding Firms Are Reshaping Global Luxury." No message, just a link. But the subheading mentioned Dubai, and I had mentioned something similar to him months ago, when he barely looked up from his newspaper. It was his way of saying, "I'm paying attention now." My mother, who once claimed she didn't even know how to use group chat, posted a photo from the engagement party in the family thread. One of Kian and me, standing near the stage. She captioned it, "Look who finally made it into the family album." She didn't tag me. She didn't react to the comments from distant cousins who wrote, "Handsome," or "Such a beautiful couple." But she left it there. That alone was monumental. And then there was Aunt Tara, the one who'd laughed the loudest about my imaginary fiancé. She sent me a Facebook friend request, liked 3 of my old travel photos from Jordan, Croatia, and one random blurry shot of me in front of a cafe in Florence. No comment. No message. She just wanted me to see it. Even Robbie texted. Robbie. Hey Robbie. Sorry if I've been a JRK, Robbie. That was impressive. I stared at the screen for a full minute. Me. Not sure if that's an apology or a TED Talk intro, Robbie. Let's go with both, I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to anymore. One afternoon, I stopped by my parents' house in San Felipe to pick up a few things my mom had asked me to take before I flew back. Some of my grandmother's old jewelry, a hand-woven shawl, and a pressure cooker that she swore was too premium to ship overseas. Kian stayed in the car, scrolling through his phone. I walked up the familiar walkway alone. The house smelled the same: incense, coriander, a faint trace of old wood. Like time hadn't dared move inside these walls. As I stepped into the hallway, something caught my eye. On the wall next to the family portrait shelf, past the ones of Robbie's college graduation, Nish's Mendi ceremony, and Dev holding up an award, there was a new frame. A recent photo, Kian and me, side by side, smiling under the stage lights of that ballroom. I froze. My mother appeared behind me, holding a folded shawl. She followed my gaze. Did you print this? I asked quietly. She nodded. Nisha emailed it. I liked it. It's a nice picture. I waited for the but. It didn't come. There was a long silence. She adjusted a vase that didn't need adjusting. Then finally, with her back still half turned, she said, I may have misjudged. My heart tightened, not because I needed more, but because I'd never even gotten this much. He seems thoughtful, she added. I didn't respond right away. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest we'd ever gotten. I never needed you to be impressed, I said, voice low. I just needed you to stop assuming I was lying. She looked up. For once, she didn't argue. You've always done things differently, she said. That's hard for us to understand. But maybe different doesn't mean wrong. It was a moment, an incomplete one, but still a crack in the wall. I took the shawl, nodded, hugged her briefly. No words, no lingering. I left before either of us could ruin it by saying too much. Back in the car, Kian looked up. You okay? I nodded. Yeah. He didn't press. That's another reason I love him. He knows that sometimes silence is the loudest kind of peace. We flew back to Dubai 3 days later, and I don't think I fully processed what that trip had done to me until the desert air hit my face. Warm, dry, unapologetically bold. The sound of Arabic and English blending through the airport. The familiarity of my own rhythm returning. Late dinners on the balcony. Morning calls with clients in Milan. Weekend flights to Paris. We were back to us. And for a while, we didn't talk about the engagement party. We didn't need to. It had done what it needed to do. But something lingered. Not anger. Not even a need for closure. It was something heavier, like a weight I hadn't named yet, but had carried for years. All those moments, they doubted me, laughed at me, dismissed me as a dreamer with no direction. Even now, after their polite smiles and awkward nods, I knew they didn't fully understand what I had built. They thought they saw it, but they hadn't really seen. I didn't want them to just come around. I wanted them to sit in the front row and witness it. So when I was invited to speak at the Global Brand and Culture Summit in Dubai, an annual conference reserved for executives, thought leaders, and royalty, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. The invitation came after my consultancy hit 7 figures for the first time. We just signed a luxury conglomerate that owned half the labels on Fifth Avenue. They wanted me to give a keynote on personal brand scaling across cultures, without traditional venture capital. I said yes, on one condition. I want to invite 2 guests, I told the planners. VIP seating. No press, just observers. They agreed. I wrote the invitations by hand. No email, no assistant, just me, a pen, and 2 simple cards. To my parents, I wrote, You once asked if I was serious about my life. I'd like to show you what serious looks like. I didn't expect a reply. They didn't text for 3 days. Then a simple message from my mother. We'll be there. When they arrived in Dubai, Kian picked them up himself. Not in a helicopter. In our Tesla. We'd done the dramatic entrance already. Now it was about elegance, precision, control. He drove them to our apartment, a sleek 3-bedroom on the 39th floor overlooking the Palm. Floor-to-ceiling windows, Moroccan tile in the kitchen, and custom lighting I'd commissioned from a Berlin-based artist. My mother stepped in and froze. Her eyes darted from the matte black countertops to the brass light fixtures, the bookshelf lined with hardcovers in 3 languages. She didn't speak. My father looked around slowly, said nothing, but I could see it, the recalibration. They hadn't pictured this. They had imagined mismatched IKEA furniture and takeout boxes, late rent payments, maybe a roommate or 2, definitely student loan debt, not investor dinners on the terrace, not me. That night, I walked onto the summit stage wearing a white tailored pantsuit and minimalist heels. Hair pulled back, no jewelry but a single gold cuff. The spotlight cut a clean line across the podium as I stepped into it. And there they were, front row, silent, watching. I told my story, not about the family tension, not directly, but about rejection, about being underestimated, about choosing the harder path when the easier one came with expectations I couldn't live with. I spoke of starting something from scratch, of scaling without VC, of clients who laughed when I pitched but called back when they saw results. I ended with this. When no one offers you a seat at the table, build your own, and then invite them to see what they missed. There was silence, then applause, then a line of people, entrepreneurs, executives, even a minor prince from Abu Dhabi, shaking my hand, asking questions, quoting my words. And in the middle of it all, my father, standing off to the side, arms folded behind his back, watching, like he did at his own conferences. Except this time, the spotlight wasn't his. Over dinner that night, my mother turned to Kian and said, "Thank you for believing in her when we didn't." He smiled politely, didn't say, "You're welcome," because it wasn't about them anymore. The real revenge wasn't that they envied me. It was that they no longer mattered. I didn't need their approval. But it was satisfying, so deeply satisfying, to see the doubt in their eyes replaced with awe, to feel them realize that I hadn't just landed on my feet. I had soared. A few days later, before their flight back to California, my father asked to speak with me. Just the 2 of us. We stepped out onto the balcony of the apartment, the sea stretched out like glass beneath us, the warm wind lifting the ends of my scarf. He leaned on the railing, quiet for a long time. Then, without looking at me, he said, "You've done well." I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to ask, why now? Why did it take a stage, a spotlight, an audience of elites for him to see what I had spent years building? But another part of me just listened. "I didn't see it before," he added, "but you've built something. Not just a business. A life." I looked at him. This man who once offered to pay my way back to grad school because he didn't think art was a career, who told me 2 years ago that branding was for people who couldn't do real work, who feared I'd end up alone and irrelevant, and now here he was, admitting it. "I know," I said, my voice calm. He nodded once, then again, and after a beat added, "I'm proud of you." It took 34 years to hear that, and by the time he said it, I didn't need it anymore, but I welcomed it, not for validation, for closure. That to me was the best kind of revenge. Not the helicopter, not the speech, not the business class seats or the applause in 5 languages. The revenge was this, becoming the woman they never imagined I could be, and then giving them a front row seat. When they left, there were no dramatic hugs, no promises of change. Just a sense that something had cracked open, quietly, irrevocably. Later that night, Kian and I sat on the balcony with glasses of tea, watching the sky fade into the sea. He looked over at me, Was it enough? I thought about it for a long moment. Then I smiled. More than enough. Because this wasn't about being right anymore. It was about being free.